Look at the map of the United States, and you will notice a bizarre geographical anomaly squeezed into the northeastern corridor. America is a land of massive territories, yet buried within its most crowded and hyper-developed region lies Rhode Island, the absolute smallest state in the entire nation by far. You might assume that being crammed into the heart of the ultra-dense New England megalopolis would turn this tiny patch of land into an overcrowded human anthill. But the reality defies all logical expectations. Today, Rhode Island is home to a surprisingly small population of just 1.1 million people. This raises a massive, unanswered geographic dilemma. When surrounded by economic titans and heavily populated states, why did this specific territory remain so incredibly isolated in its growth? Why is Rhode Island historically and structurally the undeniable runt of New England? To fully unravel this mystery, we have to start by looking right at the shocking reality of its physical size and boundaries. Rhode Island may occupy the absolute minimum space on the American map, but it sits within one of the most geographically fascinating corridors on Earth. Positioned strategically along the Atlantic coast in southern New England, this territory's physical layout has historically dictated its human settlement, economic destiny, and core identity. To truly comprehend this state, you must understand that it is fundamentally defined by its aggressive, inescapable relationship with water. A staggering 33% of Rhode Island's total surface area is completely submerged underwater. This unique geographic reality earned it the famous nickname, the Ocean State, and officially makes it the state with the second highest percentage of water area relative to its size in the country, losing the first place title only to the island chain of Hawaii. Its southern frontier borders the volatile Atlantic Ocean, where Narragansett Bay cuts so deeply into the mainland that it literally threatens to slice the state in half. This deep marine penetration creates a chaotic maze of coves, inlets, dynamic islands, and pristine natural harbors. In fact, at the northernmost point of the bay, near the industrial city of Pawtucket, the water is a microscopic 1.5 miles away from the Massachusetts border. Squeezed within this massive bay are over 30 islands, with the largest piece of land, Aquidneck Island, serving as home to the historic city of Newport. This intricate network of estuaries and coastal plains offer vital natural defense for early European settlements, laying the groundwork for thriving fisheries, massive shipbuilding industries, and a hardcore maritime culture that proved absolutely critical during the early centuries of colonization. Geologically, Rhode Island's coast is an unpredictable hybrid landscape. Certain sectors feature brutal rocky bluffs and exposed outcroppings left behind by violent glacial retreats, while other stretches are defined by long, sandy beaches continuously reshaped by fierce Atlantic tides and ocean storms. These coastal landforms are geologically young, forged during the last ice age, when massive retreating glaciers carved deep river valleys, deposited heavy moraines, and trapped the kettle ponds, and outwashed plains that characterize modern southern New England. But while the sea dominates the narrative, Rhode Island does possess actual dry land. Not a massive amount, but enough to build a state. All told, Rhode Island is the smallest state by far, containing a mere 1,000 square miles of land. This makes it roughly half the size of the next largest contender, Delaware, which possesses nearly 2,000 square miles. To put this extreme scale into a global context, you could comfortably fit the entire territory of Rhode Island inside America's largest state, Alaska, about 570 times. Unlike the rugged mountainous terrains of Vermont or Maine, Rhode Island's topography consists of gently rolling hills. However, what this landscape lacks in sheer elevation it heavily compensates for with aggressive, high-velocity river systems. The Blackstone River, for example, charges through the northern sector of the state from Massachusetts, acting as the primary economic engine that launched America's Industrial Revolution by providing the early water power needed for massive textile mills. Similarly, the Pawtucket and Woonsocket rivers slice through central Rhode Island, converging into the complex hydrologic network that dictated both the ecological baseline and the heavy industrial footprint of the region. While the broader New England region shares many of these jagged coastal features, stretching from the sandy capes of Massachusetts to the deep, rocky peninsulas of Maine, with the majestic Appalachian Mountains rising further inland across New Hampshire and western Massachusetts, Rhode Island's specific microgeography remains unique. The entire region was sculpted by the same prehistoric ice sheets, leaving behind thousands of glacial lakes, unstable rivers, and an incredibly irregular coastline. Forests still dominate the landscape, with dense canopies of oak, hickory, and maple trees covering both Rhode Island and its neighbors. Climatically, Rhode Island sits firmly inside the humid continental zone, enduring freezing winters and heavily humid, hot summers. Yet, its direct exposure to the Atlantic acts as a natural thermostat, moderating the most extreme temperatures, particularly along the southern coastline. However, this oceanic relationship carries a dark side. Devastating extreme weather events, including intense hurricanes and brutal nor'easters, are a regular part of life here, continuously reshaping the fragile shoreline. In terms of weather and ecology, Rhode Island is practically identical to nearby Massachusetts and Connecticut. But what separates Rhode Island from its New England siblings isn't just its climate or its rivers. It's the bizarre, highly controversial story of how this tiny sliver of land even managed to become an independent state in the first place. Rhode Island is an unusual state, to say the least, operating throughout history under the strange shadow of its microscopic size. This single geographic quirk has framed its entire socio-political destiny. Long before European sails appeared on the horizon, this fractured coastline was the sovereign home of several powerful indigenous nations, most notably the Narragansett, Wampanoag, and Niantic tribes. Among them, the Narragansett played the most dominant role in the region's early history. In a desperate geopolitical move, the Narragansett people initially allied with New England colonists during the bloody Pequot War of 1637. However, they abruptly abandoned the alliance after witnessing the infamous Mystic Massacre, a horrific display of colonial brutality that left the tribe deeply resentful. Shattering the norm of other profit-driven American colonies, Rhode Island's formal history began not as a corporate cash grab, but as a dangerous ideological refuge. In 1636, Roger Williams, a radical Puritan minister, was aggressively banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for preaching unorthodox religious views. Fleeing southward into the wilderness, he established a settlement named Providence on land legally purchased from the Narragansett. Williams envisioned a revolutionary sanctuary where absolute religious freedom was not merely tolerated, but fiercely celebrated, a dangerous concept that stood in stark, threatening contrast to the strict theological uniformity of its Puritan neighbors. Other radical dissenters quickly followed his trail, founding additional independent pocket settlements like Portsmouth and Newport. These isolated communities were among the absolute earliest in North America to actively enforce the total separation of church and state. Unlike its neighboring colonies, Rhode Island was not built from a royal charter imposed by the British Crown from above. Instead, it was forged from the bottom up by marginalized, exiled individuals before finally uniting under a single royal charter granted in 1663. This specific document, issued by King Charles II, granted an unprecedented degree of self-governance and explicitly protected absolute religious liberty. Remaining the supreme law of the land well into the 1800s, this charter cemented Rhode Island's rebellious identity, forever isolating it from the political cultures of both Massachusetts and Connecticut. This aggressive streak of independence exploded during the American Revolution. Rhode Island proudly became the first of the original 13 colonies to officially renounce its allegiance to the British Crown in 1776. Yet, in a bizarre geopolitical irony, it was also the absolute last state to ratify the brand new US Constitution, stubbornly holding out until 1790 due to severe paranoia that expanding federal power would ultimately crush individual and state rights. If nothing else, Rhode Islanders have always been dangerously opinionated. By the early 1800s, this rebellious energy shifted into global economics, transforming Rhode Island into one of the absolute cradles of the American Industrial Revolution. Utilizing the high-velocity, swift-moving rivers of the Blackstone Valley, massive textile mills began aggressively springing up across the northern sector of the state. In 1793, Samuel Slater, an English immigrant who secretly smuggled British textile technology to America, constructed the nation's very first successful water-powered cotton spinning mill right in Pawtucket. This single logistical catalyst launched a titanic wave of industrialization that permanently reshaped the economy of Rhode Island and New England as a whole. However, despite this explosive economic boom, Rhode Island's archaic political system actively paralyzed the massive population growth seen by its neighbors. By the 1840s, the state was still operating under its outdated 1663 colonial charter, which strictly limited voting rights exclusively to wealthy landowners. This systematically disenfranchised the rapidly growing urban working class and severely choked off migration into the state. The boiling social tension exploded into the Dorr Rebellion of 1841, a dramatic, armed attempt to overthrow and reform the political establishment. While the Dorr Rebellion technically failed on the battlefield, the massive civil unrest pressured the terrified state government into adopting a brand new constitution that finally expanded voting rights. Throughout the remainder of the 1800s and the dawn of the early 1900s, Rhode Island functioned as an economic powerhouse despite its geographic insignificance. Its core cities, Providence, Pawtucket, and Woonsocket, became hyper-dense, heavily polluted manufacturing hubs, drawing massive waves of immigration from Ireland, Italy, French Canada, and Eastern Europe. But by the mid-1900s, the brutal hammer of de-industrialization struck the state. Factories rapidly shut down or relocated to the American South, evaporating thousands of industrial jobs overnight. While specific regions have successfully rebounded by pivoting toward higher education, advanced healthcare, and high-end tourism, particularly in the urban centers of Providence and Newport, Rhode Island, never truly recovered its peak industrial dominance. Today, the territory remains deeply defined by its founding radical ideals, standing as one of the most religiously diverse and politically independent-minded states in the nation. Yet, despite being locked inside the hyper-dense New England corridor, its total population remains strangely stagnant, a demographic mystery that defies the reality of the surrounding megalopolis. At first glance, Rhode Island's population of 1.1 million people seems completely unnatural compared to its heavy-hitting New England neighbors. Geographically, it shares the exact same temperate continental climate, lucrative coastal access, and immediate proximity to the world's most powerful metropolitan corridors. It also boasts a dense, tightly woven network of historic towns backed by centuries of heavy industrial experience and world-class higher education. On top of all these structural advantages, the state sits a mere 1-hour drive away from Boston, roughly 3 hours from New York City, and is directly linked to both economic titans by Amtrak's premier high-speed rail line, the Acela. Given this insane connectivity, logic dictates that Rhode Island should be exploding with human capital. So What is the hidden bottleneck holding it back? Part of the answer is a brutal reality of simple geographic math. Rhode Island is microscopically tiny, containing just over 1,000 square miles of dry land. It remains the absolute smallest state in America by an insurmountable margin. To understand this perspective, you could fit the entire territory of Rhode Island inside its direct neighbor, Connecticut, nearly 5 times, and inside nearby Massachusetts, roughly 7 times. It is crucial to remember that both Connecticut and Massachusetts are already considered quite small by American standards. Yet, physical geography only tells half the story. After all, if Rhode Island were densely developed to the same extreme level as the suburban or urban zones of its immediate neighbors, its limited landmass could easily sustain millions of additional citizens. The true explanation is a complex, volatile cocktail of physical geography, structural history, economic trauma, and outdated political framework. Geographically, Rhode Island is heavily fragmented and dictated by water. With more than 33% of its total surface area submerged, much of the remaining physical land is broken apart into isolated peninsulas, chaotic bays, and disjointed islands. While this creates a stunning coastline, it actively multi-fractures continuous urban sprawl and limits large-scale, uninterrupted land development. Crucially, Narragansett Bay cuts so deeply into the heart of the mainland that modern transport networks and heavy logistics infrastructure must continuously navigate around water obstacles. While this marine layout served as a goldmine for maritime trade during the early colonial centuries, it now acts as a physical barrier that paralyzes suburban extension and complicates urban sprawl, especially when compared to the broader, flatter, and far more adaptable inland regions of Connecticut, or the massive Boston metropolitan area. Historically, Rhode Island's development deviated sharply from its siblings. Unlike Massachusetts, which aggressively consolidated its early economic growth around the singular gravity of Boston, or Connecticut, which anchored its development near the massive pull of New York City, Rhode Island completely failed to form a dominant, centralized metropolitan anchor until much later in its timeline. Instead, as the territory grew throughout the 1800s, it emerged as a scattered constellation of highly localized small mill towns and mid-sized industrial centers: Providence, Pawtucket, Warwick, and Woonsocket. None of these individual hubs achieved the massive critical mass required to define and dominate the region early on. This creates a fascinating demographic anomaly today. While Providence certainly commands national, cultural, and political prominence, the city itself remains structurally tiny, holding a population of only about 190,000 residents. Economically, Rhode Island walked into a brutal de-industrialization trap. The state industrialized earlier and faster than almost anywhere else in North America, filling its borders with hyper-dense mill towns that once drove global textile production. However, it also de-industrialized earlier and harder than its peers. As manufacturing facilities began shutting down across the mid-1900s, well before the Rust Belt crisis, crushed states like Ohio or New York cities like Pawtucket and Woonsocket were slammed with immediate population loss, decaying infrastructure, and massive corporate underinvestment. This is where Rhode Island's trajectory split from its neighbors. Massachusetts successfully navigated this crisis by executing a swift, aggressive pivot into elite higher education, biotechnology, and venture finance, anchored securely by the massive infrastructure of Boston. Meanwhile, Rhode Island's economic reinvention has been drastically slower and highly uneven. Similarly, Connecticut, despite losing its heavy manufacturing base, successfully retained immense financial centers around Stamford and Hartford due to its corporate proximity to New York City. These severe economic headwinds turned Rhode Island into a less attractive destination for massive inward migration. For most of the late 1900s, the state endured practically flat net growth, with several years witnessing a severe net outmigration as citizens fled the stagnant economy. While the state has recently begun reversing this long-term trend thanks to a massive revitalization of the urban core in Providence and its new status as a cheaper, quieter alternative for workers priced out of Boston, its raw numbers still lag light years behind either Connecticut or Massachusetts. Today, Rhode Island is home to just 1.1 million people, a figure that is completely dwarfed by Connecticut's 3.7 million and Massachusetts' massive 7.1 million residents. Within its tiny borders, Rhode Island possesses a handful of mid-sized cities, none of which qualify as major national hubs. This urban network is led by Providence, with its 190,000 residents, followed by Cranston, Warwick, and Pawtucket, each clustering tightly at around 80,000 people. And in terms of formal metropolitan statistical areas, Rhode Island's compact size forces another bizarre anomaly. It only has one, the Providence metro area. Yet, the Providence metropolitan area is home to a staggering 1.6 million people, a number significantly larger than the population of the state of Rhode Island itself. This statistical paradox occurs because the metro area absorbs the entire state of Rhode Island while simultaneously swallowing a massive, economically integrated portion of southern Massachusetts. It stands as just one more unpredictable, unique quirk of America's smallest state. Rhode Island remains compressed in both physical size and total population, cementing its status as the definitive runt of New England. Yet, rather than hiding from its spatial limitations, the state actively leans into its unique coastal identity, ensuring that despite its microscopic footprint, Rhode Island remains one of the most culturally distinct and instantly recognizable states in the entire nation. If you want to keep exploring how strange borders and physical limits create hidden demographic anomalies across America, click right now to check out our video on why Indiana is the definitive runt of the Great Lakes states. Thanks for watching GeoAtlas, and we will see you in the next exploration.